Welcome. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you all being here. I know that some of you have come from actually quite a long way, and I'm sorry there are not enough chairs, but I hope that it'll be a really engaging discussion, so it'll be worth it regardless. So thank you so much. Thank you to Lutyen and Rubinstein for hosting us tonight, and of course to Jenna and my colleague Jade, wherever she is. Jade, Wade, for organising this event, and of course to Francesca from the Brook Charity for joining us tonight, and hopefully it should be a very engaging discussion. Just a few housekeeping items before we start. Reminder of trigger warnings in the book. Can I Stray contains themes of suicidal ideation, sexual assault, and deliberate self-injury. Today is not only Sexual Health Week, it's also World Mental Health Day, so it's a perfect day to have this discussion. So I'm Archna Sharma. I'm going to be your host for tonight. I'm the founder of Neem Tree Press, and I'm going to introduce you to our guests. Jenna Adams, our fabulous author, lives in London, and she writes from her third-floor flat, which is covered in plants. She's a regular contributor at the Book Network, and Can I Stray is her first novel. Jenna is passionate about exploring mental health, consent, and codependency in her writing. But I hear a whisper that her next book may be a rom-com. So, Francesca has been an education and well-being specialist at the Brook Charity for the last 3 years, teaching sex education to young people, training professionals, and working one-to-one around harmful sexual behaviour. And if that isn't keeping her busy enough, she's also getting her master's in public health part-time, and she still finds time to read avidly. So thank you for being here. Okay. So I will read the blurb of the book first, and then Jen, you're going to do a reading, and then we're going to have a discussion about the book. So, 14-year-old Brooke Tyler has spent her whole life waiting for a boy to choose her. Matt is about to go to university, scared to leave behind everything he knows. When both are cast as romantic leads in Romeo and Juliet, they fulfill the roles of forbidden lovers both on and off the stage. Brooke is sure that her fairy tale is coming true, and best of all, Matt is older. Brooke considers secrets and lies a small price to pay for her first boyfriend, but the relationship is set to cost her after one night alone in an empty auditorium. When Brooke learns that Matt's actions that night were illegal, her world shatters. Years later, Brooke and Matt reunite as adults. Matt wants to undo all the damage he caused, but Brooke makes a choice, which forces them both to question their relationship. Told in 3 acts, this captivating debut explores a young woman's journey for independence as she strays away from everything she has ever known to navigate her traumatic past. And with that...
So this little extract from towards the beginning of the book, so not too many spoilers, don't worry. I couldn't believe it. He likes me. Okay, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. Then let's do it. But can we keep it between us? I detected the plea in his voice. Of course, I said. So no telling your mum or Amy. No, only people I really trust. No, Brooke, he spoke seriously now. You can't tell anyone. If we're going to be a thing, I grinned so hugely at this that it made my mouth ache, but I couldn't fight it. His tone seemed so serious in comparison, I felt I had to hide my exploding joy. Then you can't tell any of your friends, not a single one, not Lucy or Callum or any of your school friends. They wouldn't tell anyone. Someone would find out, Brooke. Maybe they wouldn't tell, but it always gets out. Please, we can't be together if you tell anyone. I'm not trying to give you an ultimatum or anything, people would say things, think things if they found out. I didn't care about any of it. All I cared about was the fact that he said there was a chance we could be. Is that okay? It was so incredibly hard not to squeal with delight. Yeah, I said, trying to control my voice.
Really lovely reading. Thank you. So before we ask questions, I have a question to ask the audience, actually. So I'm going to have to word this very carefully. Please put up your hands if you feel that the RSC, so relationship and sex education you received in school, was insufficient or inadequate. There we go. We should take a photograph of that. But anyway, it's like yes. Well, that's what we think too. And yeah, we'll talk about that. Okay. So some questions. I'll start off, Jen, with you first. Jenna, when did you start writing, and have you always wanted to be an author?
Yes, author came pretty quickly after Unicorn and Princess. But yeah, some of my friends here who went to school with me will remember me scribbling in a notebook in my lunch breaks, trying to get this first draft out. So it's been a very long journey, more than a decade that I've been working on this.
Brilliant. So where did the idea for Can I Stray originate, and how long did it take you to write the book, and did the narrative change over time?
Yeah, so the idea of where it came from was because I had a crush on a boy, which is a really rubbish reason to write a book. He was older. I'm sure he didn't even know my name. But while that crush quickly passed, the story seemed to, well, clearly didn't pass. So it did start as a love story, but then I got older and I became more informed about consent and healthy relationships and power dynamics within relationships. And so my concerns about the ethics of the age gap kind of fed into the narrative and shaped it. So I really grew up with Brooke because I started writing this when I was 14 and she starts the book when she's 14, but we finish with her when she's an adult.
Brilliant, great. So can you tell us a little bit about the plot, but without giving away any spoilers? Because I think most of you probably haven't read the book yet. Yeah,
a few people have. But yeah, so it's kind of this coming of age story centered around this relationship, and what starts off as very much a kind of teenage girl's fantasy quickly starts to slip into hotter waters, and then over time we see the adult perspective as well. So we do see the characters when they're a bit older, when they're adults, and when they're looking back at this relationship and how their perspectives have changed.
Francesca, can you tell us a little bit about the Brook Charity and what kind of support you give to kids who are 16 or older?
Yeah, so I'll try not to give any spoilers. I have recently finished and I was, obsessed. Like, you should definitely all buy it. It's a really, really, really good book. So Brooke worked mainly with young people between 13 and 25. So, like, ideally kids who are Brooke's age. Pun not intended, we actually didn't realise, I didn't know the main character was also called Brooke. So we mainly teach sex education to young people, and ideally that's kind of starting from primary school into secondary school. I also train teachers, which is pretty hard because most of them are quite surprisingly not very confident to be talking about sex and relationships still. And then also some one-to-ones, which could also be with some of the young people that like similar situations as the book. And then we have social media accounts and things like that. So you can follow us as well on Instagram, particularly if you know lots of teenagers and they need some better messaging alongside this book. We do really great messaging around sex and relationships.
I know we might discuss a little bit later. How are you funded? That's important.
Yeah, so we're mainly funded, or I'm at least funded by Hounslow Council. So a lot of West London. So some boroughs will basically decide they have some negative health outcomes in relation to sexual health and harmful relationships. And then we also do income generated stuff. So some schools will pay us to come in more because they really don't want to teach themselves. So sometimes we do big assemblies and stuff like that, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Jen, if you could meet Brooke at 14, what would you say to her?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think Brooke at any age just kind of needed to know that she was lovable and she was always loved and there were always people around her who loved her. When she's dealing with her bad mental health, I would just tell her, like, things get better, please reach out for help. Hopefully if she reached out for help, things would have got better for her quicker, but then there'd be no book, so never mind. But I think the real challenge with a 14-year-old is, like, 14-year-olds can be really hard to persuade to the adult perspective, which sounds like a challenge that maybe you have to deal with in your job.
Yeah, definitely. Like, they often don't want to listen to adults, and even if you say, oh, this is the best thing for you, they might, as a result of that, do the opposite. So yeah. Which,
how do you persuade them around?
It's quite hard. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I guess just like good sex education, good models of things. Like I was saying earlier, it's so great now we have this book, so I can be like, look, if you don't believe me, just read this book. Like, take a look at how it's like going through things through time as well. Because I think I sometimes say, like, it might not feel like this now, but as you get older and you get that perspective and you look backwards, and you see the dynamics, particularly not just the years, but the stage you're at when you're 14 and when you're 18, they are wildly different. so hopefully education and persuasion.
So, Jen, Can I Stray spans an 8-year timeline, which starts with Brooke and Matt in secondary school, and then towards the end they're navigating the working world as adults. How has the passing of time been dealt with in the novel?
So as you say, it's 3 acts, and we do kind of have a bit of a time jump in between each act. Having started writing it when I was 14, I think there's quite a lot of accuracy to the 14-year-old's worldview. Hopefully there's been authenticity in that it was written by a 14-year-old. The 14-year-old's idea of what a 22-year-old's life was like was wildly inaccurate. In the first draft, by the time Brooke was 22, she had like a 1-bed flat to herself and was a senior editor at a newspaper. And then when I edited that, when I got older, it suddenly became like a shithole flat and a PA job. So that made a lot more sense. But obviously, as well, it's the recurring theme is them becoming more aware of power dynamics and more aware of healthy relationships.
We touched on this a little bit, but I think it's worth exploring a little bit more. So obviously you work from, you said 13 to 25-year-olds. So do you find that perspectives do change as people get older, and are they more aware of power dynamics and you can reach them a little bit more? What's the sort of like the threshold, if you like, where they suddenly become a bit more amenable?
Yeah, I think normally it's when they turn 16 or they start like... maybe everyone else around them's having sex or people talk about it more, then they kind of start to think, oh, was there maybe that first interaction I had, like, you can, I guess, see that through the book as well, that people sometimes realise with those years looking back, especially when you get to 18 and you're an adult and you can see that, oh, I'm very, very different to when I was 14. So I think, normally that transition to being an adult, you take less risks as you get older, right? When you're younger, you're invincible and you do what you want, or you follow the boy that you like. Whereas as you get older, you maybe make more measured judgments.
So where do the post-18-year-olds come from?
In terms of to Brooke?
Yes, to Brooke.
Yeah. Sometimes it can be, we do university work as well, but they are, it's quite hard because they sometimes don't want us to come in because they think that the students won't come. So they think that, so a lot of unis don't want to make it mandatory, which is a massive shame because obviously like it's only just become mandatory, so only kids now or even from last year will be getting mandatory education. So we can, I guess it has to be like popular culture really that has that messaging that shows clearly what consent is and isn't. TV shows, books, music, radio shows, stuff like that. So I think sexual health charities can do some work, but unless we're in a room with them, it's quite hard, apart from social media. I guess, that's... Right.
And are you a national charity?
We are, yes, okay. So mainly in London, Manchester, Bristol, and Liverpool. But we do, depending, like, whoever wants to pay us, we go, basically. So.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So, Jen, some of the themes featured throughout Can I Stray are mental health, consent, and codependency. Why do you think it's important to talk openly about these?
For me, there are two main reasons. The first one being shame, because shame is the feeling that drives us inwards and makes us silent. So, for example, if you feel shame about, for example, mental health, that silence is the last thing you need because you're isolating yourself and you need connection. You can't possibly get better on your own without reaching out. So while mental health awareness has like shot up a lot in the last 10-15 years, it's still a long way to go, especially with like men's mental health. But I think I'd just say if someone opens up to you about theirs, it can make it easier for you to open up to you about yours. But the second reason is also like if you've been through something and you have a story and you've learned lessons, then if you share that, you might be able to help someone who's younger than you, who's in a similar situation, or it might even have a preventative effect. I mean, in an ideal world, if someone reads this book, maybe if an old boy is talking to them, they might be thinking, hang on, I'm going to be wary because of this kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think secrecy is a huge thing that a lot of people keep. They're unable to talk about certain things. So hopefully this book will help to open up discussions around that. So, Francesca, I wanted to ask you, when are students actually taught about consent now? And is it earlier than when Brooke heard about it in the in the story, or is it a similar age? And why do you think the RSC is really important across schools?
Big questions. So ideally it would be, you'll all be happy to hear, a little bit before Brooke would have learned at school. So ideally from like the beginning of secondary school, but also primary level as well. So obviously a lot of that education starts with being able to communicate your boundaries and being able to say like, I don't want to hug my grandma, or I don't want to play with this person or that person. Ideally, yeah, starting from, but obviously it really depends on teachers' confidence. So a lot of schools, they might say the bare minimum, so what's breaking the law, for example. So they'll say like, oh, if you're drunk or you're underage, you can't consent. But we don't really see that much, or that's kind of what Brooke tries to do, is really to go in and open up the conversation, to give people the skills to talk about what they want, rather than just, or if you're not drunk and you're over 16, then that's fine. Obviously, we want to take it a bit further. Like, how do you speak about what you like? How do you say, I do really like you, but I'm not sure I'm ready for this yet? So kind of trying to empower them with like what it should look like, what it sounds like, and also what it feels like as well. In terms of improvements, I think it's imperative really that everyone knows how to have a healthy relationship, and that everyone knows what their standards are. And clearly, because I think in this book, which is why it's such a good representation, I'm trying not to give too much away, is that the young person involved is not like really, really upset about the relationship. It's quite nuanced, isn't it? It's not just like this person's horrible, and the guy in question is also not this like evil stranger in an alley, which I think is, because obviously, unfortunately, we know that mostly abuse happens in relationships or with someone you know. It's anywhere from 25% to 40% of young people under the age of 25 have either experienced or find themselves in an unhealthy relationship. So that kind of suggests that maybe some of the mental health and like the emotional manipulation, psychological manipulation is actually a bit more prevalent maybe even than things like sexual assault. So yeah, I was really happy when I read this book. So I was like, thank God, like it's a big gap that I think has been filled by like a book, because TV goes one way. Lots of young people, particularly ones I seem to work with, also love reading. So it's a really nice medium. And it's obviously quite entertaining as well. So
thank you.
Yeah,
that's actually a really interesting point, that sexual assault is arguably one extreme end of, but actually you've got abuse all along the way.
Yeah, and it can be, I mean, obviously most young women do find themselves in these situations, young men slightly more increasingly, and that can also be really obviously hard for them to talk about. But particularly this, younger girl, older boy is quite a big phenomenon we do see quite a lot still. And if you're a sex education teacher, they're like, oh, of course you'd say that, like, because you have to tell us the law. So it can be, we need not just like a teacher, we need all of society to kind of question that and be like, is that okay? Is it, it's not the 4 years or the 5 years that matter, but it's who's an adult and who's a child and who still needs to learn and get some education from school or teachers or books or whatever it is. Yeah.
I wonder how the US does it, and I don't really know, but it would be interesting to see how other countries do it.
America's a funny one. No, sorry if anyone is American, but just in terms of sex education, some states are abstinence only, which means that's like basically considered illegal to talk about sex, and definitely not allowed to speak about, obviously, some states like contraception, condoms, stuff like that. But some states are introducing it a little bit more. But yeah, America's a bit of a enigma, we don't have enough time to talk about.
Jen, so Can I Stray is a work of fiction, but it draws on real world experiences. How does the story inform or challenge understandings of victimhood, especially for those who don't think that they are a victim?
Yeah, so I think this goes back to what Francesca was just saying about it being nuanced, and about the fact that he wasn't horrible the whole time, and that kind of thing. I mean, the word victim has a very clear image attached to it, which is kind of this stereotype of the perfect victim. And as humans, we want easy, simple, digestible narratives with a villain and a victim. But when we have the stereotype, then if something doesn't fit into that stereotype, we might not treat that person as a victim, or give them the help or support they need, or even believe them. We might blame them. And I think that's what I hope Can I Stray gives nuance to, because Brooke is absolutely not the perfect victim. I mean, like, she's super annoying. She's really clingy. She can be kind of obsessive. And it's not like the whole relationship was unwanted. She was pursuing it at the start, but she was pursuing it her idea of it. And so some people may look at her and think, well, that's not what a victim looks like, so I'm not going to believe her. But the truth is, everyone is capable of getting hurt. She's 14, it's not her job to know what's best for her or act in her own best interests. Certainly not unless she's been armed with the skills to do so. When she does get older, Brooke actually hurts other people in certain ways, especially the people closest to her. But that doesn't mean she didn't get hurt. In Act 3, there's another relationship that she's in, and she's really codependent in that relationship, and her codependency is hurting her partner. Even though it's not her fault, it's still hurting this other person. So we're all capable of hurting and being hurt. I mean, I've written down a quote here because I'm a fan of Monroe Bergdorf. Some other fans in the house. She had Sean Fay on her podcast, who's the author of The Transgender Issue, an amazing book I am guilty of having not read yet. But Sean was saying, trauma can make you a toxic person for a bit. It doesn't play out in this perfect victim way. Sometimes I feel as a public-facing trans woman, some people put you on a pedestal, but they also want me to be a perfect victim of oppression and a strong woman who overcame it. And it's a little bit more complicated than that. And then Monroe replied saying, I've been an absolute nightmare at stages of my life. I've been writing my book at the moment and writing about my past relationships. It was really wild revisiting some of them and identifying that I was the problem in some of them, even though I didn't see it at the time, and how my trauma and how my inability to accept love played out in how I would push people away.
Yep, no, that makes a lot of sense. So, Francesca, does the scenario that we're talking about, a large age gap, come up a lot when you're visiting school events? And is it gendered in the same way that you have a younger female and an older male? And do you think that this book is a relatable portrayal of teen relationships?
Yeah, so I guess I said I knew this was coming up as a theme about the younger and older. I think it's becoming maybe slightly less common as norms do change. It's like probably not seen as I know, like, definitely when I was at school, I think we're probably a similar age, but it was very like kind of, oh, is it a bit weird, but the girl seems happy, or like there's no kind of concerns in terms of the cases of young people. There's quite a lot of, I guess what we'd say is like adultification, so young people being seen like, oh, well, because they seem like they really want to be in this relationship, therefore will kind of not seem too concerned, and particularly because a lot of them, you know, they don't look like a perfect victim. They're not necessarily screaming to their school for help. It might be something that we notice in a more of a subtle way. And yeah, I obviously really, really think it's a great representation, mostly because there is just that nuance between someone who's really fancies someone and also is kind of hurting people in that process and maybe needs, you know, healthy relationship support, not just because they were the victim, but because that might be playing out in an unhealthy way for their future as well. And then obviously ideally it would be the Matt in this situation would also get some level of support, which is quite a lot of the work that I do sometimes with male perpetrators or people who have, which can be really, really hard to be like, you know, a certain high level of compassion to be sat across from someone who probably has assaulted someone or harmed someone in quite a serious way. But also those people need like restoration and rehabilitation in the same way, because otherwise, you know, that kind of can push them further away and can lead to repeating behaviour and things like that. So that would be the ideal scenario with like the right funding,
right,
and availability, stuff like that.
Right, but you don't go into prison, so you don't work with people who've already been.
So I don't work with people who've been arrested or charged,
right.
But the criminalisation rate and the conviction rate in the UK is at all-time low. So only about 1.6% of people, reports that make it to the police, actually result in a criminal charge or prison time. So we are seeing like a lot of people retracting claims, or like in this scenario, like no one ever really finding out. So that's sometimes if they do find out and someone doesn't want to go to the police, they technically can't be arrested if the victim doesn't want to prosecute. So there's going to be probably some changes to the legal system coming soon. But for those young people, like they might just go back to their original classes, and the schools will know, okay, we want, like, I guess a specialist sex ed teacher to make sure it doesn't happen again. So it's quite a big task for me. Probably should be ideally someone else who's maybe more specialised, a police officer or like a properly trained therapist, but they don't often have provision for that. So it's kind of left down to charities to But don't worry, mostly I'm successful. Mostly it goes really well. And because they have someone who's like, and sometimes actually the female work and male client works quite well in the sense that they're like, I give them that space to say whatever harmful opinions they have, and I really try and gently steer them into something that's a bit more positive. And mostly actually it's not these like big criminals, it's someone who just hasn't understood something, or they didn't know, they just genuinely didn't get taught. I think it's probably more educational and societal than it is like overtly criminal, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So how many one-on-ones would you be doing in over a month, do you think?
Every month. Oh, that's a good question. They took me off doing so many because they used to only do like 5 a day, and I was like, it's quite exhausting.
5 a day.
Yeah, 5 in a row. But that wasn't all like harmful sexual behaviour, but now I've been kind of put on that as a specialism a bit more, because I had some pretty positive outcomes. So now I do like three young people at one time normally. So like sometimes 2 a day. So much lower.
That's but that's still quite intensive actually. 2 a day.
Yeah.
Can be. Yeah. So we've touched on keeping things secret. So Brooke and Matt keep the relationship secret, but one assumes that someone knew or someone suspected. I think that we all know, maybe people in our lives, and you're like, something going on. So there are many adults that could have intervened in the relationship, or perhaps prodded a little bit more between Brooke and Matt, but they don't. So how responsible as a society are we in creating the sorts of conditions that create boys/men like Matt and women like Brooke?
I think this really touches on what you just said about education and the culture and the society that we live in being where the work can focus and where we can make a real difference if we're focusing on that at the moment. Because like, as you said, while the age gap thing might not be that rare, unhealthy teen relationships are super common. And so I think like it is about like building the culture up from the ground up. I mean, thinking about how are we indirectly teaching toxic masculinity. I know Brooke have worked with an organisation called Beyond Equality last year, and on their web they work directly with boys and young men, and they said boys won't be boys, they'll be what we teach them. So it's how are we teaching entitlement, how are we teaching autonomy and boundaries. Are we arming people with knowledge? Are we arming them with the empathy skills and understanding of privileges and how they all intersect? I mean, it's quite a big ask when like students that have to like put their hand up to go to the toilet, and that's not showing much bodily autonomy to them. I mean, I had no lessons on consent at school, and I had one on sexual assault, which came when we were 18 years old, 2 years over the age of consent. And it was delivered by police officers who told the story of a sexual assault. And when we left, one of my friends said to me, that was an assault. And I realised like the officers had failed in some ways, and they'd failed to say, what consent actually is, that it's not just the absence of a no. And again, it came way too late. I thought it would be so much more effective to have that lesson if you've, at 5 years old, if you've been taught to ask before you take someone's photo or ask before you hug someone. That lays a lot more groundwork for respecting people's boundaries and understanding your own bodily autonomy and where you leave off and someone else begins.
Yeah. And it does start in families, doesn't it? You were saying, you don't have to hug grandma if you don't want to. That's a tough one. It's a tough one for most grandmas, I'm sure, And also there's also the sense of, well, are you then not teaching your child etiquette? There is sort of expectations society has. So it's a very complex discussion, I think. And practicality. So, Francesca, so what resources do you think have become available recently that weren't available maybe, as you said, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago?
Yeah, I guess like people are talking about a lot, people are writing about it, obviously, which is like...
No, really... just one.
There's only one. No, but I think... some books do tackle it, but like not as clearly as this one, which is why again I'm like, oh thank God, because a lot of it is like there's obviously a sex education session in the book, and that's really nice, like just to show like it's normal, we are meant to be talking about it at school. I guess obviously like Book have a website and Instagram. There's it's a bit of a competitive space sometimes, like in terms of big sex educators who are individuals. Like there's someone called Ruby Rare who's really great, and there's lots of other people. Like once you kind of start deep diving into it on Instagram, there's lots of different accounts and TikTokers and stuff like that. I do sometimes say though that it's all very well there being like certain people in certain spaces talking about it, but it does have to be a lot more universal, like parents at home. Sex education sector is very oversaturated with people who present as women, and particularly white women, and that is obviously like an issue that that's only a small population, that doesn't necessarily represent. So any men in the room who want to become sex educators, let me know, because you will definitely be able to be hired. So for example, there's Beyond Equality who work with just men, and there's a director, I think he's the director of education, called Ben Hurst, who does like really, really great work with young men. Sometimes it can seem like, well, of course women will talk about it, and actually sometimes it has to be just a bit beyond people in just the sex education space. So families are a good place to start, and hopefully we see more like TV shows where it's commissioned. I know we have like Normal People we were speaking about earlier, but some of those are still quite about, I guess, when things go wrong. So we want like positive messaging as well, which is, again, I'm not trying to spoil the book, but parallels that well, that you've got like what it looks like in a positive way, and also what it looks like when someone hasn't consented. Having the clear comparison is what young people and all people need, because obviously, like, you know, thinking about, not everyone some people are new to the idea that, I'm actually meant to enjoy sex, and like I'm allowed to ask for what I'd like, and I'm allowed to explore and experiment and take it a bit beyond the like, yes is yes, no means no, because obviously sometimes you don't necessarily automatically know what you want before you go into an erection. I always happens to be a situation. Much better adults than children. Wow. But obviously there's a book called, I'm not sure if anyone's read it, I think it's called Sex Will Be Good Tomorrow, or something like that. It's a really good book and kind of deals with a lot of the nuance. Oh my god, no way! Sex Will Be Good Again, that's the one. Which is a really, really good read about also not just the yes means yes and no means no, but how can we let like desire be spontaneous, and how can people talk about that? Sometimes when we speak about consent education, people sometimes say like, oh, but do I have to say yes every single time, or what if I want a partner who surprises me, or, you know, how do you have that conversation as well? So I think it will always grow through time, the conversation around consent.
And I guess there's a sort of movement now starting with male allyship, sort of the notion that, you know, we as women can push so far, but ultimately actually men have to step up. And often it's those toxic discussions in an all male environment that then lead to, you know, externalization of that sort of culture. So I think lots of discussions to be had all around. So I think we're going to open the floor up to questions.
Don't
Anyone have a question? Yes.
Hiya. You were touching on with the charity that you use a lot of things like Instagram and stuff, and kind of looking at the book. I have read it, sorry. And mainly the only communication is sort of like texting and Facebook. I guess that's a little bit in the past now. Like, how would you imagine it being different in a modern day 14-year-old who has Instagram and TikTok, and I don't know, maybe the charity is dealing with more issues or maybe less issues because people are discussing things more?
Yeah, I would say, great question. I would say probably more issues, unfortunately. Not to be too depressing, because sometimes sex education, if you talk about the issues, can be a bit heavy. I think things like pornography are making it a little bit hard for us to talk about like consent, because most young people's education's like, a lot of it's modelled on online interactions, and a surprising amount of young people don't know like it's made for entertainment. A lot of young people don't know, for example, that like you have to consent to sex. Like they kind of know what it is, but they don't know you have to be like, yeah, I really like this, or I really want to do this. Snapchat, Twitter, TikTok, it really depends on the age you're accessing it though. For example, like it can be healthy, it can be harmful. It really depends on what's kind of happening already. If you're prone to, I guess, anxiety and depression, or you're vulnerable already, have other factors going on in your life, like this young person in this book, it, you know, like Brooke probably now it would be even harder, I reckon, with like social media and comparing yourself to everyone else and things like that. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. It's getting a bit more, I'd say, a bit more extreme. Like the harmful cases are getting a bit more harmful, but then the positive stuff is getting better because people are talking about it more. So a bit balanced.
Yeah, I wouldn't even know how to write this for, like, you know, just 10 years later. I mean, I think there's a lot of problems in schools with, like, people being pressured into sending nudes when they're all underage and all this kind of stuff. Like, I wouldn't even know how you guys deal with that, to be honest.
Yeah, I would say, that's probably actually happening a little bit more than maybe like people actually having sex. It's more like things are getting a bit more digital. But then also it's getting a bit better because we're going in and teaching them. So and that's probably something that schools are really, they do tend to hit the hard stuff first. So we get less like healthy relationship stuff, but they do always teach, like most schools will be teaching like consent, sexual assault, like nudes and the laws around them and stuff. So yeah, I do think that the education is getting better, but it's quite slow, that's for sure. I can imagine.
And are you finding that primary school kids are getting to social media too? So it's not really a...
Yeah, a little bit more. I think the thing with younger kids is that parents are like, no, they shouldn't use social media, whereas it's like the teenagers who are like, you know, they have an iPhone and they have everything on that one phone. They don't have that same like offline and online distinctions we might have. I think that's written quite nice in the book as well. It's not like for me, as like my online life, and then there's like I have like this distinction, whereas like, most young people, it's just like life. And they'll like switch between both, so.
Interesting.
Yeah, great question.
Yes.
If you have a friend or someone that you know that you suspect is in an unhealthy relationship, what's the best way to kind of navigate that conversation without, you know, pushing them away or, you know, making them feel like they have to be defensive or anything? And is that explored at all in the book? So, the question.
Great.
Yeah, I don't think in the book, because of the pressure to keep it secret that comes from Matt, Brooke finds herself really isolated. She's not able to talk to her friends about it, or her sister, or her mum, or just anyone in her life about it. She's just not telling a single person. And obviously there's a very good reason for that. So it's not really covered in the book.
Yeah, but Jen, what I would say though is she's withdrawing. Right, so she's withdrawing from everyone in her social circle. So that should actually have been a red light to everyone in her social circle. But people just let it happen. Right?
It's true, yeah. I mean, we do see one friend say she doesn't feel as close, or she feels like something's up. But I think there are quite a lot of signs.
There were sufficient signs, but nobody did anything about it. They just
So it is always a bit tough, and you do want to be there for your friend. And without pushing them away or scaring them away, I think ultimately it does have to be an individual's decision to leave that relationship. And it sounds like Brooke is all about empowering that person to do that decision themselves.
I'm sure everyone's been in that situation before with a friend. I think maybe a bit easier when you're an adult to ask people like, what are your goals in your relationship? And are you still, do they still make you feel good about yourself? And asking them how they would advise, like how, if it was the reverse, how would you advise me, can be quite a good one. But you obviously have to be careful not to isolate people, because if they feel like everyone is judging them or against them, they will be less likely. So you just, I guess, have to continue the support, but also gently say, like, the saying to someone, oh, you deserve better, dump them, is very easily said as advice, but obviously quite hard to take. And obviously people can also be like, can feel like they're in love with someone, have a nice relationship with someone who's also harmful. So I guess just like saying your opinion in a if you can offer it in a gentle way, but take that. Not everyone's gonna unfortunately take it, and it normally takes people about 2-3 tries to leave an abusive or unhealthy relationship. So keeping that in mind is quite a delicate one.
I also think the notion of privacy around teens is very interesting. As a parent myself of 2 teenage boys, you want to know who they're messaging, actually. But you can't ask, firstly because you don't necessarily know their passwords, but also because there is this notion that, it's it's private. And I think that's, you know, arguably if her mother had been able to look at her texts, that perhaps she might have been able to find out, you know, something was happening.
Yeah.
But, you know, we don't.
Yeah,
Right,
Brooke
so-
even in the book, she for the most part is deleting the text because she's worried someone's going to go through her phone and find this out. That's how committed she is to keeping it secret. On one hand, there's obviously the natural parental concern, and you know, we can all say, like, if Brooke's mother went through her phone and found this out and was able to shut it down, that would probably all be for the best. But on the other hand, when we're trying to like cultivate this autonomy for the individual person, that's the other argument to it. So if we can go through, I think the kind of education and empowerment is a really good route rather than like discipline. Obviously, like, I kind of do wish Brooke's mum had been able to just take this away and shut it all down. But in the first place, we would want Brooke to be armed with the information she needs to make the right decision for herself and be like, hang on, I'm 14, this guy's 18, and I've heard something about this, or I've talked about it in school, I've got a feeling like something's not quite right here. I've talked to teachers who said, you know, if you're going to be in a teen relationship, it should be similar age, things like that.
Yes.
How did you choose the title and the book cover?
So the title, it went through several titles. The title is a Shakespeare quote, which is kind of hidden in the in Act 2, and it's not Romeo and Juliet, it's Richard III, or one of the kings. And it's now no way can I stray, save back to England, all the world's my way. So you have to read it to understand the significance. But yeah, the cover, I was really lucky. I have a friend who unfortunately has COVID and couldn't be here today, but she's very, very skilled and designed the cover, which I think a lot of people agree is very beautiful. So we've been very lucky.
I wanted to ask, because one of these problems of, you know, consent and children, young people feeling like they have to conform, they have to say yes. These are not new problems. Certain that parents have encountered them when they were young. Is the charity work that you're doing exploring education to parents to be a bit more vulnerable when their children come of age? Because there's a lot of power dynamic between a parent and a child. And talking about these things would probably be easier if parents owned up to some of the regrets they had about their own young times.
Yeah.
And teachers and counselors and sex educators.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I can't see you, but that's a great question. Yeah, we would like to move more into parent education. Unfortunately, with the current political party in power, they don't tend to spend that much money on like health and well-being. Like all our budgets are continuously cut, so we get like smaller numbers we can teach and things like that. So yeah, definitely, like, it's something that needs to be done. Sometimes we see though parents don't love us going into schools and talking about it, but we also know they're not actually all having the conversations at home. Some of us get lucky. My mum's here today and she was very good with we were talking to us about like sex and consent, and my older sister was a lot as well. It kind of depends on like luck of the draw, I guess, in terms of a lot of families and I guess like backgrounds might not want to talk about it as openly in the same way. And yeah, we don't actually see that many parents withdrawing their kids from sex education anymore, but continuing the conversation at home. And a lot of kids find the parent dynamic a bit awkward as well. Like, they don't want to talk to their mum about, and particularly when they can tell they're kind of doing something that's not going, like, that's not right, or that there's a bit of iffiness. Like, none of the young people I do one-to-one work with, their parents know like absolutely nothing until the police or a social worker needs to be involved, really. So yeah, I wonder if that's maybe getting worse. I can't actually say, I don't know, because I don't work that much with parents, unfortunately. Yeah. But if you are a parent, keep up the conversations. If you have younger kids, I don't know.
And I guess make it mandatory at university level.
And university level would really help as well, yeah.
So I think there was another question. Yes.
I was just going to ask Jenna, is it a little bit autobiographical?
Some of it. The central relationship is fiction. A lot of the setting and themes are personal to me, or the setting, as being a 14-year-old girl when I was writing it, that's kind of all I had to go off. So the setting's quite familiar to me. The central relationship is fictional, but it's kind of what I was surrounded by growing up, not necessarily an age gap, but unhealthy teen dating dynamics, really bad understanding of relationships and sex education, people, like all kinds of, there's a party scene quite early on in the book, which is very reminiscent of what I was surrounded by when I was a teenager. So I'd say it's, while it's fiction, it's also hopefully quite true.
My question was kind of, at what point did you realise, or did the character realise that there was a problem, and where did she go? What did she do? What were her sort of resources at the time?
She finds out basically a bit too, like, she has a sex and relationships education lesson, which is actually, it's not the best lesson, but it's way better than anything I got in school. And that's when she realises the law and what's the implications of what's happened. She, again, is a bit, does she want to believe it? Is she choosing to believe it? Is it easier to kind of believe the version of events she had before? That's the issue with it coming too late. And in terms of the resources she has, it's very, very little. She is, again, because of the secrecy and because of the lies, she is dealing with this mostly on her own. I do wish, if it was real, she would go on Brooke's website and find their service, maybe walk in, something like that.
Yeah.
Did you consider yourself being a sex educator because of having gone through these kind of...
Me?
on a small level, but kind of going into schools and speaking about your book and speaking about...
Yeah, that has always interested me, and being a sex educator has interested me because at school it was online YouTube sex educators that when I was like, hang on, they're telling me this, school's telling me this much, I'm learning this much on YouTube. So that was really, that was quite interesting, and it is something I'm really passionate about, but I also have other passions, so we'll see.
I'll do it for you.
Thank you.
I think if you've got the time, I think we are going to try and see whether we can have some school visits. I think schools are generally open, it's just a case of finding time. A lot of them have evening talks, so we'll have to work through that.
No, just because you held up the book there, and I was just wondering if this book, or like what kind of books you read during the writing process that you feel like were influential or helpful. Is there anything that inspired you while you were writing?
Yeah, my favourite author is Holly Bourne, she writes quite similar. She writes stuff mainly targeted around like 16-year-old girls just starting college. And it's tons of different themes like healthy relationships, consent, mental health issues. Like she's got one with a character with OCD, and the main theme is just like opening up to your friends. It's really, really good, like really powerful books because they like really go into this group that has lacking education in certain area, and tells a story which sometimes like the fiction story hits home more than a non-fiction book. But I did also more recently. I read Losing It by Sophia Smith-Gaylor, and this book, Can We Talk About Consent, is actually aimed at anyone over the age of 14. This is by Bish UK. And she actually talks about this and this, which is why I bought this. But yeah, these are amazing. You need to read them, basically.
Yes. So obviously you have split it into 3 different sort of time perspectives, and the earliest is set while the main character is 14, and then she turns into a young adult. And in the last couple of decades, young adult novels and new adult novels have had an absolute explosive boom in the book world recently. Do you think you'll revisit that age bracket at all in any future work, or do you think maybe you're going to refocus to something that's sort of carry on with new adults? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the new adult genre, and some people don't think it's a real genre, but it definitely is. But yeah, so yeah, I definitely feel like, as you say, it's a new genre because you used to go from 18 to 21 and suddenly you're a homeowner and you're married and you have children, and it's all, and now we have this like 18 to 30 gap where you're like kind of an adult but you're still settling in. I think that I can't remember who created new adult genre, but they said it's if adulthood is a pair of new shoes, then new adult genre is about the blisters you get wearing the new shoes. So I think that's it. Like I know a lot of people are, you know, find their 20s really hard or really roller coasters or up and down, deal with all kinds of stuff, and really find themselves as well and come out with like new understandings of themselves, which is really powerful. So yeah, I think with that and with TikTok is, yeah, as you say, a booming genre. I would love to revisit it. As I say, it's quite a heavy book and I'm going to go for like a cheesy rom-com next. But yeah, I would love to revisit it.
I think we're done. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Hope you found that really interesting. Please go ahead and buy the book. And even more importantly, please write reviews. Only 5-star ones. Just joking. Yeah, on Goodreads, on Amazon, wherever you can, because that really helps. It helps everyone actually and the book to have more visibility, and I think it should. Do you want to just, before we go, do you want to talk about Sexual Health Week and anything else that you're doing?
Yeah, sure, yeah. So, yeah, Brooke, it's like Sexual Health Week this week, which is pretty nicely timed, this event. So we have quite a lot of stuff going on in terms of on Instagram. If you, kind of a bit more for young people, if you by any chance a teacher, we're having a big RSC lesson on Wednesday. There's a panel at the Vagina Museum on Wednesday about barriers. And are you actually?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Wow.
I actually can't make it because they moved the date because it was meant to be around the time of the state funeral and stuff, but that should be a really, really good event. We're also having a couple of webinars. If you go to our Instagram and our website, it's brook.org.uk, and the Instagram is brook_sex positive, so everything should be on there. And obviously just thinking about themes, reading whatever you can. If you have any influence over schools, obviously just preaching the importance of sex education, and also read the book, give it to anyone who's like a teenager as well. I think when I was reading it, I was like, I wish I was 16 or 14 reading this. Like, it would have been just so useful to have in the absence of sex education, but also to supplement it, because it's nice to have like a teacher teaching, but also just something that's because it is a big theme, but I really thought it would be the whole way through, but actually it's quite a small part. It's just a really enjoyable read. I read it a bit too fast because I was like, have to finish it before Monday. I'll probably reread it again in a few months.
Last words.
Last words. I want to say a few thank yous, but I'll make it real quick, and then we can go have some drinks. And if you buy a book, I will scribble. There are always acknowledgements at the back of the book, but it's always, one page. It's never enough to actually truly express my gratitude. So I want to say thank you all so much for coming. It means so much to me that you're all here. And thank you to Lutyens and Rubinstein for hosting us. Quite a lot of people in this room actually beta read the book, some sort in a more embarrassing state than others. So thank you for your feedback, which made it so much less terrible. Thank you so much to Francesca for joining us here today and for all the amazing work you do at Brooke. And finally, the big two. Firstly, to Archna, my publisher. Thank you so much for taking this on and making it a reality. Without you, none of us would really be here today. So thank you so much. And lastly, to Jade, who I know doesn't want the spotlight on her, but she did everything. I mean, everything. So this book is absolutely half Jade's, because without her, it would be a Word document. So
thank you.
But please do, go get another drink. I'll buy the book and I'll come sign it.